The November wind carried the scent of diesel fuel and coming snow across the empty lot of Millbrook gas station, somewhere along Highway 47 in northern Montana. The kind of place travelers passed through without remembering, where the fluorescent lights hummed too loud and the coffee tasted like it had been brewing since morning regardless of what time you arrived. It was nearly dusk when Marcus Webb first saw them. He'd been walking for 3 days straight, his burnt orange canvas coat doing little against the cold that seeped through the fabric like water through cracked stone. His dark brown hair, streaked with silver at the temples despite being only 38, lifted in the wind. A week's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and his gray-blue eyes carried the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much and spoken too little about it. His canvas backpack, faded and fraying at the seams, held everything he owned in the world. $47 in his pocket, a discharge letter folded in his coat, and the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. Beside him trotted Sergeant, a 5-year-old Belgian Malinois with a tan and black coat, intelligent amber eyes, and a slight limp in his left hind leg from shrapnel that never fully healed. The dog had been Marcus's partner in Afghanistan, his shadow through 2 tours, and the only living thing that understood what the silence between gunfire sounded like. When Marcus was discharged after taking fire that shattered his left shoulder, Sergeant was retired too. They'd walked out of Fort Bragg together and hadn't stopped walking since. Marcus was heading toward the station's restroom when he heard it. A car door slamming. Then voices, sharp and impatient. "Just leave him here, Dad. Someone will find him. We can't just. We already decided. He's your father, not mine. I'm not spending my inheritance on a nursing home." Marcus slowed his steps. Sergeant's ears pricked forward, his body tensing. A sleek black Lexus SUV sat idling near the gas pumps. 3 people stood beside it. A man in his early 50s, tall, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that looked absurd in a place like this. His hair was perfectly styled, silver at the temples, and his face carried the tight, furious expression of someone who believed the world owed him convenience. This was Richard Calhoun, though Marcus didn't know the name yet. Beside him stood a woman in her late 40s, blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, designer sunglasses perched on her head despite the fading light. Claire Calhoun, Richard's wife. Her manicured fingers clutched a leather purse like a shield. And then there was the third person. An elderly man sat slumped in a wheelchair beside the SUV. He looked to be in his late 70s, thin to the point of frailty, his body bent forward as though gravity had become too heavy to resist. Wisps of white hair clung to his spotted scalp. His hands, gnarled with arthritis, rested uselessly in his lap. He wore a faded brown cardigan over a flannel shirt, both too large for his shrinking frame, and his legs were covered by a threadbare wool blanket that had slipped halfway to the ground. But it was his eyes that stopped Marcus cold. Pale blue, watery, and filled with a devastating awareness. This man knew exactly what was happening to him. "Dad, please," the younger man said, his voice strained with false patience. "Just stay here. Someone from the county will come get you. It's better this way." The old man's lips trembled. He tried to speak, but only a faint, garbled sound emerged. Stroke, Marcus realized. Recent, maybe within the last 6 months. Claire crossed her arms. "Richard, we need to go. Now, before someone sees us." Richard hesitated for just a moment, something that might have been guilt flickering across his face. Then it hardened. He turned toward the SUV. "Wait," the old man rasped, the word barely audible. Richard didn't look back. The Lexus's doors slammed shut. The engine revved. And then they were gone, taillights disappearing down the highway like 2 red eyes blinking out of existence. The old man sat alone in his wheelchair, the wind tugging at his blanket. His head bowed forward. His shoulders began to shake. Sergeant growled low in his throat. Not a warning. Something else. Indignation, maybe. Or recognition. Marcus felt something hot and terrible ignite in his chest. He'd seen abandonment before. In villages burned to ash. In soldiers left bleeding while convoys rolled past. But this was different. This was family. This was a son walking away from his father like discarded trash. He crossed the parking lot in long, purposeful strides. Sergeant stayed close to his heel, eyes locked on the wheelchair. The old man didn't notice Marcus at first. He was crying quietly, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, his breath coming in short, broken gasps. Marcus knelt beside the wheelchair, bringing himself eye level. "Sir," he said softly, "my name is Marcus Webb. I'm not going to leave you here." The old man's head lifted slowly. His pale blue eyes met Marcus's gray ones, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Then, with tremendous effort, the old man raised one trembling hand and gripped Marcus's wrist. His fingers were weak, but the intent was clear. "Thank you." Sargent stepped forward and gently rested his chin on the old man's knee. The gesture was so deliberate, so tender, that Marcus felt his throat tighten. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. The old man's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. Then, slowly, painfully, he managed 2 syllables. "Frank." "Frank," Marcus repeated. "All right, Frank. Let's get you out of this wind." Marcus pushed the wheelchair toward the gas station's covered entrance. The attendant inside, a bored teenager with headphones in, didn't even glance up. Marcus found a bench near the door and carefully helped Frank shift onto it, wrapping the wool blanket more securely around his legs. Sargent sat at Frank's feet, a warm, solid presence. Frank's breathing had steadied, but his eyes were still wet. He looked at Marcus with a mixture of confusion and desperate gratitude, as though he couldn't understand why this stranger had stopped. Marcus sat beside him. "You got any other family, Frank? Someone I can call?" Frank shook his head slowly. His mouth twisted in effort. "No," he whispered. "Just Richard." The name came out like a curse. Marcus exhaled slowly. "The man who left you here." Frank nodded, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. "Where do you live?" Frank's hand trembled as he pointed vaguely north. "Calhoun Ridge." Marcus frowned. "That a town?" Frank shook his head again. "Property. Mine." Understanding began to dawn. "You own property. And Richard, he's your son?" Frank nodded. "He trying to take it from you?" Another nod, more vehement this time. Frank's face twisted with anger and grief. "Wants to sell. I won't sign." Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place. Richard hadn't abandoned his father out of cruelty alone. He'd done it to break him, to make him so desperate, so helpless, that he'd sign over whatever land Frank was protecting. Sargent whined softly, as if sensing the injustice. Marcus looked down at the dog, then back at Frank. "How much land are we talking about?" Frank's eyes brightened slightly. He held up his hand, fingers trembling, trying to gesture. 100 acres. Ridge overlooks valley. He paused, struggling for breath. "Spring. Underground." Marcus leaned closer. "A spring? Like water?" Frank nodded eagerly. "Not just water. Mineral. Rare. Worth." He couldn't finish, but the meaning was clear. "Worth a fortune." Marcus sat back against the bench, his mind racing. An underground mineral spring on 100 acres of Montana ridgeland. No wonder Richard was circling like a vulture. "You got papers?" "Deed." Frank nodded. "Cabin. Hidden." "Hidden where?" Frank's expression shifted to something cunning despite his frailty. "Safe place." "Richard doesn't know." Marcus smiled faintly. "Smart man." Frank managed a weak smile in return. The wind picked up, rattling the gas station's metal awning. Snow had begun to fall, fine and cold. Marcus looked at the old man beside him, shivering despite the blanket. Looked at Sargent, who had positioned himself protectively between Frank and the parking lot. Marcus had been walking for weeks with no destination, no plan, no hope beyond the next meal. He'd been a ghost, drifting through the world without touching it. But now, for the first time in months, something inside him solidified. "Frank," he said quietly, "I'm going to help you. I'm going to get you home, find those papers, and make damn sure your son doesn't take what's yours." Frank's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't from despair. "Why?" he whispered. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "Because someone did the same for me once. And because it's the right thing to do." Sargent barked once, sharp and affirming. Frank reached out with his trembling hand and gripped Marcus's shoulder. The gesture carried a weight Marcus hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Belonging. Trust. "Thank you," Frank managed, his voice breaking. Marcus stood, his jaw set with quiet determination. "Let's get you home, Frank. Wherever that is." He didn't know yet about the spring beneath Calhoun Ridge. Didn't know about the geological surveys Frank's late wife had commissioned in the 1970s, or the letters from mining companies offering millions for mineral rights. Didn't know about Richard's mounting debts, his failed investments, or the desperation that had driven him to abandon his own father on the side of a highway. But Marcus would learn. And when he did, he would stand between Frank Calhoun and the wolves trying to devour him. Sergeant looked up at Marcus, tail wagging slowly, and for the first time since leaving the service, Marcus felt like a soldier again. Not because he was holding a rifle, because he was protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. And that, Marcus thought as he pushed Frank's wheelchair toward the road, was worth more than any medal they'd ever pinned to his chest. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing the highway in white. Somewhere in the distance, a pair of headlights appeared. Marcus raised his hand, flagging down the approaching truck. This was just the beginning. The truck that stopped was a rusted Chevy Silverado, forest green with patches of primer showing through the paint like old scars. The driver, a man in his 60s with a weathered face and kind eyes, leaned out the window. "You folks need help?" he called. Marcus nodded. "This man needs to get home. Calhoun Ridge. You know it." The driver's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features. "Frank Calhoun? That you?" Frank's head lifted weakly. He nodded. The driver stepped out of the truck, moving quickly despite his age. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded denim jacket and work boots caked with mud. "Name's Ed Holloway," he said, extending a hand to Marcus. "I've known Frank for 30 years. What the hell happened?" Marcus shook his hand. His son left him at the gas station. Ed's face darkened. "Richard." He spat the name like poison. "That worthless son of a bitch. I told Frank years ago that boy was rotten." Frank made a weak sound of agreement. Ed looked at Marcus with new respect. "You the one who found him?" "Yeah." "Then you're a better man than most." Ed turned to Frank. "Come on, old friend. Let's get you home." Between the two of them, they managed to lift Frank into the truck's passenger seat. The wheelchair folded awkwardly into the bed. Sergeant jumped in beside it, settling protectively over Frank's belongings. Marcus climbed into the truck bed as well, sitting with his back against the cab. The cold wind bit at his face, but he didn't care. Through the rear window, he could see Frank's profile, his head resting against the seat, eyes closed. Ed drove carefully, navigating the winding mountain roads with practiced ease. The landscape shifted from highway to forest, tall pines rising like sentinels on either side. Snow covered everything, turning the world into a monochrome painting. After 20 minutes, the truck turned onto a narrow dirt road marked by a weathered wooden sign. Calhoun Ridge, private property. The road climbed steeply, switchbacks cutting through dense timber. Marcus caught glimpses of the valley below, vast and dark under the falling snow. Finally, the trees opened into a clearing. And there it was. The cabin sat at the edge of the ridge, a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney and a covered porch. It wasn't large, maybe 2 bedrooms, but it had been built with care. The logs were chinked tight, the roof solid despite its age. Firewood was stacked neatly along one wall, and a rusted propane tank sat beside the porch steps. But the place had the look of abandonment. Snow drifted against the door. The windows were dark. The porch sagged slightly on one side. Ed parked the truck and killed the engine. "Frank hasn't been up here in 6 months," he said quietly to Marcus. "Not since the stroke. Richard kept him in town, in some shitty apartment. Kept saying the cabin was too remote, too dangerous for an old man. Kept him away from his own land," Marcus said. "Exactly." They helped Frank into his wheelchair and pushed him toward the cabin. Marcus noticed Frank's eyes brightening as they approached, his gaze sweeping across the familiar landscape with something like hunger. Ed produced a key from his pocket. "Frank gave me a spare years ago, just in case." The door creaked open, releasing a smell of dust and stale air. Inside, the cabin was cold but intact. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Simple furniture, a wooden table, 2 chairs, a worn couch, sat exactly where they'd been left. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books, old photographs, and keepsakes from a long life. Marcus wheeled Frank inside. The old man's hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, his breathing quickening. He looked around the room with an expression Marcus recognized. A soldier returning home after deployment. Relief mixed with disbelief. "Welcome home, Frank," Ed said softly. Frank's eyes filled with tears. He nodded, unable to speak. Marcus and Ed worked quickly, getting the fire started, checking the propane, running water through the pipes to clear them. The cabin warmed gradually, golden light from the fire filling the room. Sergeant explored every corner, sniffing methodically before settling near Frank's wheelchair. Ed pulled Marcus aside while Frank dozed by the fire. "You planning to stay?" Marcus hesitated. "I don't know. I was just passing through. Frank's going to need help. He can't manage this place alone, not with the stroke." "What about Richard? Won't he come looking?" Ed's expression hardened. "Richard thinks Frank's still at that gas station, or picked up by the county and dumped in a state home. Either way, he's not expecting his father to be here." He paused. "But when he finds out, there'll be trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that comes when money's involved. Frank's sitting on 100 acres of prime land with an underground mineral spring running through it. There've been offers. Big ones. Millions." Marcus looked at Frank, sleeping peacefully for the first time in who knew how long. "And Frank won't sell." "Damn right he won't. This land's been in his family since the 1890s. His grandfather homesteaded it. His father built this cabin. Frank's wife is buried up here, in a grove about a quarter-mile north. He'd rather die than let Richard turn it into a goddamn resort or mining operation." Marcus felt something settle in his chest. A decision made without words. "Then I'll stay? At least until Frank's back on his feet." Ed studied him for a long moment. "You ex-military?" "Marines. 2 tours in Afghanistan." Ed nodded slowly. "That explains the dog. And the look in your eyes." He extended his hand again. "Thank you, Marcus. Frank's a good man. He deserves better than what his son gave him." They shook hands. Ed left as night fell, promising to return in a few days with supplies. Marcus locked the door behind him and stood for a moment in the quiet cabin, listening to the fire crackle and Frank's gentle snoring. Sargent padded over and sat at Marcus's feet, looking up at him with intelligent eyes. "What do you think, Sarge?" Marcus murmured. "We just sign up for another tour?" Sargent's tail thumped against the floor. Marcus smiled faintly. "Yeah, me too." He pulled a blanket over Frank, added another log to the fire, and settled onto the couch. Through the window, he could see the ridge stretching away into darkness, snow falling steadily. Somewhere beneath this land, water flowed through ancient stone, carrying minerals worth a fortune. Somewhere in town, a greedy son was planning his next move. Somewhere in the past, Frank Calhoun had lived a full life with a wife he loved and land he cherished. And now, in the present, a homeless veteran and a Belgian Malinois were all that stood between an old man and the people who wanted to take everything from him. Marcus closed his eyes. For the first time in months, he slept without nightmares. Morning arrived cold and bright, sunlight streaming through the cabin windows and painting the log walls in warm gold. Marcus woke to the sound of Sargent scratching at the front door, his signal that he needed to go out. Frank was still asleep in his wheelchair, head tilted back, mouth slightly open. His breathing was steady, peaceful. Marcus stood quietly, stretched the stiffness from his shoulders, and let Sargent outside. The view stopped him cold. From the cabin's porch, the ridge dropped away into a vast valley, forested slopes rolling down to a silver ribbon of river far below. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks white with early snow. The sky was impossibly blue, the kind of clear, clean blue that only existed at altitude. It was beautiful, stunningly, achingly beautiful. Sargent bounded through the snow, nose to the ground, tracking scents only he could detect. Marcus followed him down the porch steps, boots crunching in the fresh powder. As he walked, Marcus noticed something odd. The snow near the cabin's foundation was disturbed, not by animal tracks, but by boot prints. Recent ones. Within the last few hours. His marine training kicked in instantly. He knelt, examining the prints. Size 11, maybe 12. Deep impressions, suggesting a heavy person or someone carrying weight. The tracks circled the cabin, stopping at each window as though someone had been looking inside. Sargent returned to Marcus's side, growling low. "Yeah, I see it," Marcus murmured. The tracks led away from the cabin, disappearing into the tree line to the east. Marcus followed them for 50 yards before losing the trail where the forest floor became too dense with pine needles. Someone had been here, watching, waiting. Marcus returned to the cabin, his jaw tight. He checked the locks on the doors and windows, then woke Frank gently. The old man's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded his face. Then recognition dawned, followed by relief. "Marcus," he rasped. "Morning, Frank. How'd you sleep?" Frank managed a weak smile. "Best in months." Marcus helped him into the bathroom, then to the kitchen table. He found instant coffee in the cupboard, canned soup, crackers. Not much, but enough for breakfast. As Frank ate slowly, Marcus sat across from him. Frank, someone was here last night. Circling the cabin. You know anyone who'd do that? Frank's expression darkened. He nodded. Richard hires people. Watches me. You mean he's had you under surveillance? Another nod. Wants to know where I keep papers. The deed to this land. And others. Frank paused, gathering strength. Survey maps. Mineral reports. Letters from buyers. Where are they? Frank's eyes gleamed with cunning. Safe place. Richard looked everywhere. Never found them. Can you tell me where? Frank hesitated, studying Marcus's face. Then, slowly he nodded. Trust you. Thank you. Frank pointed toward the stone fireplace. Hearth. Loose stone. Bottom left. Marcus crossed to the fireplace and knelt, examining the stones. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then his fingers found it, a stone slightly smaller than the others, its mortar cracked and crumbling. He worked it free carefully. Behind it was a hollow space, and inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of documents. Marcus carried them to the table and unwrapped them. Frank watched, his breathing quickening. The first document was the deed, dated 1892, transferring ownership of the land from the U.S. government to Frank's grandfather, Ezekiel Calhoun. Handwritten, official, irrefutable. Beneath it were geological surveys from 1974, commissioned by Frank's late wife, Margaret. The maps showed the ridge in cross-section, revealing an underground aquifer fed by a mineral spring. Notes in the margins described the water's composition. High concentrations of lithium, rare earth elements, and trace minerals used in battery production and pharmaceuticals. Marcus's eyes widened. Frank, this isn't just valuable. This is fortune, Frank whispered. Margaret knew. Kept it secret. Too many vultures. There were letters, too. Offers from mining companies, pharmaceutical corporations, even foreign investors. The numbers were staggering. 15 million. 23 million. One offer from a Chinese consortium for $42 million. All declined. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten letter, the ink faded but still legible. Marcus recognized the handwriting as feminine, careful, filled with love. My dearest Frank, if you are reading this, I am gone. I'm sorry to leave you with this burden, but I trust you to do what's right. The spring beneath our land is a gift, but also a danger. Men will come for it. They will lie, threaten, and steal. Protect it, Frank. Not for the money, but for what it represents. This land is our legacy, our home, the place where we built our life together. Do not let Richard have it. I love our son, but he does not understand what truly matters. He sees only dollar signs where we see roots. If you must, find someone you trust. Someone who will stand with you when I cannot. I will always be with you, my love. In the wind through the pines. In the water beneath the stone. Yours forever, Margaret. Frank's hands trembled as he touched the letter. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back with the others. She was right, Frank. You can't let Richard have this. Frank nodded, his jaw set despite the tears. Won't. A sudden bark from Sergeant drew Marcus's attention. The dog stood at the window, ears forward, body tense. Marcus moved quickly, peering through the glass. A silver pickup truck was climbing the dirt road toward the cabin. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the driver, a man in his 30s, wearing a baseball cap and reflective sunglasses. He drove slowly, deliberately, as though surveying the property. The truck stopped about 50 yards from the cabin. The driver sat there for a long moment, engine idling. Then he lifted a phone to his ear. Marcus's gut clenched. Frank, you recognize that truck? Frank wheeled himself closer to the window, squinting. His face paled. Brian Moss. Works for Richard. What's he do? Security. Intimidation. Frank's voice shook. Richard's attack dog. The truck suddenly reversed, tires spinning in the snow, and drove back down the ridge. Marcus watched until it disappeared. He was checking to see if you were here. Now he knows. Frank closed his eyes. Richard will come. Let him. Marcus's voice was cold, steady. He's not taking this land. And he's sure as hell not taking you. Sergeant moved to Frank's side, resting his head on the old man's knee. Frank placed a trembling hand on the dog's head, drawing comfort from the contact. Marcus gathered the documents and re-wrapped them carefully. We need to make copies of these. Get them somewhere safe. A lawyer, maybe. Frank nodded. Ed knows a lawyer. Good woman. Honest. Ed's coming back in a few days, right? Yes. Good. We'll give him everything then. Marcus paused. In the meantime, we fortify. Lock the doors, keep watch, and don't let anyone in unless we know them. Frank managed a weak smile. You sound like a soldier. I am a soldier, Marcus said quietly. And right now, you're my mission. The words hung in the air, solid and true. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the pines. Snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. Marcus stood at the window, watching the tree line. Sergeant joined him, silent and alert. They were being watched. Marcus could feel it, that old combat instinct that had kept him alive in Helmand Province. Someone was out there, waiting, planning. Let them come. Marcus had faced Taliban fighters, IEDs, sandstorms that buried entire convoys. He'd carried wounded men through firefights and held the line when everyone else retreated. A greedy son and his hired thug didn't scare him. Behind him, Frank dozed in his wheelchair, finally safe in his own home. And Marcus Webb, homeless veteran with $47 and a loyal dog, made a silent promise. Frank Calhoun would not be abandoned again. Not on his watch. 3 days passed in careful routine. Marcus woke early each morning, built the fire, helped Frank with his exercises, the slow, painful work of regaining movement after a stroke. Frank's right arm had limited function, and his speech remained slurred, but his mind was sharp. Sharp enough to guide Marcus through the cabin's supplies, its routines, the rhythms of life on Calhoun Ridge. Sergeant became Frank's shadow, following the old man's wheelchair from room to room, resting his chin on Frank's lap when the exercises became too difficult. The dog seemed to understand Frank's limitations, moving slowly, offering comfort without being asked. On the evening of the third day, Ed Holloway returned. His truck rumbled up the ridge road just as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. Ed carried 2 heavy boxes of supplies, groceries, propane canisters, warm blankets. His weathered face broke into a smile when he saw Frank sitting by the fire. Color returned to his cheeks. Damn, Frank, you look better already. Frank grinned. Good care. Ed set down the boxes and turned to Marcus. You're doing good work here, son. Marcus nodded. We need your help with something. He laid out the documents on the kitchen table, explaining everything. The mineral spring, the surveys, the offers, Margaret's letter, Brian Moss's visit. Ed's expression grew darker with each revelation. Christ, Frank. This is bigger than I thought. Need lawyer, Frank said. I know just the one. Ed pulled out his phone. Diane Mercer. Handled my wife's estate when she passed. Tough as nails and honest to a fault. He made the call. After a brief conversation, he hung up. She'll be here tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. Marcus felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. Thank you. Ed looked at him seriously. You know Richard's going to fight this, right? He's not going to let Frank keep this land without a war. I know. And you're prepared for that. Marcus met his gaze steadily. I didn't come this far to walk away now. Ed smiled, something warm and approving in his eyes. Margaret would have liked you. Frank made a sound of agreement. That night, after Ed left, Marcus sat on the porch with Sergeant. The cold was sharp, the stars impossibly bright overhead. From somewhere in the valley below, a wolf howled, the sound lonely and ancient. Sergeant's ears pricked, but he didn't bark, just listened. Marcus thought about the path that had led him here. The war, the injuries, the discharge, the long, aimless months of walking with no destination. He'd been a ghost, drifting through a world that didn't need him anymore. But here, on this ridge, protecting an old man and a piece of land, he felt solid again. Real. You think we can pull this off, Sarge? He murmured. The dog looked up at him, amber eyes reflecting starlight. Marcus scratched behind his ears. Yeah, me too. Diane Mercer arrived the next morning in a sensible Honda CR-V, dressed in a navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase that had seen years of courtroom battles. She was in her late 40s, with short gray hair, sharp green eyes, and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd built a career on being underestimated. She shook Marcus's hand firmly, greeted Frank with genuine warmth, and spread the documents across the kitchen table. For an hour, she read in silence, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When she finally looked up, her expression was grim. "Frank, this is ironclad. The land is yours, the mineral rights are yours, and Richard has no legal claim to any of it." Frank exhaled in relief. "However," Diane continued, "Richard can still make your life hell. He can file for conservatorship, claiming you're mentally unfit to manage your affairs. He can challenge your residency here, claim the cabin's unsafe. He can tie this up in court for years." "What can we do?" Marcus asked. Diane looked at him. "Who are you exactly?" "Friend. Caretaker. Whatever Frank needs." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Here's what we do. First, I file a protective order preventing Richard from contacting Frank or entering this property. Second, I petition the court to assign Frank a neutral guardian ad litem, someone to verify he's competent and being cared for properly. Will that work? It'll slow Richard down. Give us time." She turned to Frank. "But you need to be prepared. This is going to get ugly." Frank's jaw set. "Bring it." Diane smiled. "That's the spirit." She left with copies of the documents, promising to file the paperwork that afternoon. Marcus walked her to her car. Before she got in, she turned to him. "You know what you're doing?" she asked quietly. "Not really. But you're staying anyway." "Yeah." She smiled, a genuine, approving smile. "Good. Frank needs someone in his corner. Someone who won't run when things get hard." "I don't run," Marcus said. "I can see that." She climbed into her car. "Watch yourself, Marcus. Richard's dangerous when cornered, and he's desperate." As her car disappeared down the ridge road, Sergeant trotted over and sat beside Marcus. "Looks like we're in it now, Sarge." The dog barked once, sharp and certain. Marcus returned to the cabin, where Frank was dozing by the fire. The old man looked peaceful, safe. Marcus added another log to the flames and settled into the chair opposite. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying secrets from the underground spring far below. And somewhere in town, Richard Calhoun was learning that his father was still alive, still fighting, and no longer alone. The war for Calhoun Ridge had begun. The call came 2 nights later. Marcus was heating soup on the propane stove when Frank's old rotary phone, dusty and nearly forgotten on a side table, rang. The sound was jarring in the quiet cabin, a mechanical trill that seemed to echo off the log walls. Frank stiffened in his wheelchair. "Don't answer." But Marcus was already moving. He lifted the receiver. "Hello." Silence. Then breathing. "I know you're there, old man," a voice said. Male, mid-50s, dripping with contempt. "Richard." Marcus said nothing. "You think you're clever, hiding up on that ridge? You think I won't find you? I own you, Dad. You're incompetent, helpless, and when I'm done, you'll be in a state home where you belong, and I'll have every inch of that worthless land." Marcus's grip tightened on the receiver. "This isn't Frank." A pause. "Who the hell is this?" "Someone who's not going to let you hurt him." Richard laughed, cold and sharp. "Let me guess. Some drifter who thinks he's a hero? You have no idea what you've walked into, friend. That land is mine. And my father is a senile old man who can't even wipe his own ass." Marcus's voice dropped to something low and dangerous. "If you come near this property, you'll regret it." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." Richard's voice hardened. "You just made a big mistake." The line went dead. Marcus set the phone down carefully. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. Frank was staring at him, wide-eyed. "He'll come. Let him." That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat by the window with Sergeant at his feet, watching the tree line. Clouds had rolled in, obscuring the stars. The darkness felt heavy, oppressive. Around 2 a.m., Sergeant's ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Marcus tensed. "What is it, boy?" The dog moved to the door, nose working furiously. Then he barked, 3 sharp bursts. Marcus grabbed the flashlight Ed had left and stepped onto the porch. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the clearing. At first, he saw nothing. Then movement, a figure at the tree line, watching. "I can see you," Marcus called. "Come out or get lost." The figure didn't move, just stood there, a dark silhouette against darker trees. Then, slowly, it stepped forward into the light. Brian Moss, Richard's security man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black jacket and work boots. His face was hard, unreadable. "You Marcus?" he called. Yeah. Richard wants to talk. Tell Richard to go to hell. Moss smiled, but there was no humor in it. He figured you'd say that. So he sent me to deliver a message. I'm listening. Leave. Tonight. Take your dog and walk away. Frank's not your problem. And if I don't, Moss shrugged, then things get difficult for everyone, especially the old man. Sergeant growled again, deeper this time. Marcus felt the weight of the moment, the choice. He could walk away, leave Frank to his fate, disappear back into the anonymous wandering that had defined his life for months. But the thought of abandoning Frank, of leaving him to Richard's cruelty, filled Marcus with a cold, focused fury. Tell Richard, Marcus said slowly, that if he wants this land, he's going to have to go through me. And I don't go down easy. Moss stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, almost respectfully. Suit yourself. He turned and melted back into the trees. Marcus stood on the porch for another hour, flashlight in hand, Sergeant alert beside him. When he finally went back inside, Frank was awake, worry etched into his weathered face. You should leave, Frank whispered. Not your fight. Marcus knelt beside the wheelchair. Frank, I've spent the last 6 months running from everything. From my past. From my failures. From the people I couldn't save. He paused, his voice roughening. I'm not running anymore. This is my fight now. Because you're worth fighting for. Frank's eyes filled with tears. He gripped Marcus's hand with surprising strength. Thank you. Marcus nodded. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. But neither of them slept. Outside, the clouds broke apart, revealing a sliver of moon. The wind carried the scent of snow and pine. And somewhere in the darkness, Richard Calhoun was planning his next move. Morning arrived gray and cold. Marcus woke to the sound of an engine, distant but growing closer. He was on his feet instantly, Sergeant already at the door. Through the window, he saw a convoy of vehicles climbing the ridge road. 3 trucks, all dark, all moving with purpose. Frank wheeled himself to the window, his face pale. Richard. The truck stopped in a line across the clearing, blocking the only road down. Doors opened, and 7 men stepped out. Richard Calhoun led them, wearing an expensive wool coat and leather gloves, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Beside him walked Brian Moss and 5 others, all hired muscle, big men with hard faces. Marcus stepped onto the porch. Sergeant stood at his side, hackles raised. Richard smiled when he saw them. It was the smile of a predator closing in on wounded prey. Well, the hero and his dog. Richard's voice dripped with mockery. I have to admit, I'm impressed. Not many people are stupid enough to get between me and what's mine. This isn't yours, Marcus said evenly. It's Frank's. My father, Richard said, gesturing toward the cabin, is a broken old man who can barely speak. He's incompetent, and I'm his only living relative, which means this land is mine. That's not how the law works. The law works however I want it to. Richard took a step closer. I have lawyers, money, connections. What do you have? A dog and a death wish. Marcus didn't respond. Richard's smile faded. I'm going to give you one last chance. Walk away. Now. Or I'll have you arrested for trespassing, elder abuse, and anything else I can make stick. From inside the cabin, Frank's voice rang out, stronger than Marcus had heard it. This is my land. You're trespassing. Richard's face twisted with rage. Shut up, old man. This is your fault. If you'd just signed the papers like I asked, none of this would be necessary. I'll never sign, Frank said. Richard turned to Moss. Get him out of there. Put him in the truck. Moss started toward the porch. Marcus stepped into his path. Move, Moss said quietly. No. Moss's hand went to his belt, where Marcus saw the outline of a gun beneath his jacket. I said move. Sergeant's growl was a low, continuous rumble, a warning. For a moment, the clearing was silent. Tension hung in the cold air like a drawn blade. Then a new sound, another engine. A police cruiser appeared at the top of the ridge road, lights flashing. Sheriff Hank Morrison stepped out. He was a tall man in his late 50s, Native American, with iron gray hair and a face carved from hard experience. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming in the morning light. That's enough, Hank said, his voice carrying authority. Everyone stand down. Richard turned, his expression shifting to false charm. Sheriff Morrison, thank you for coming. I called because this man, he pointed at Marcus, is holding my father against his will. Hank's eyes narrowed. That true, Frank? Frank wheeled himself to the doorway. No. Marcus helps me. Richard tried to abandon me. That's a lie, Richard snapped. My father is confused. See now. He needs professional care. He's got care, Marcus said. He's got me. Hank looked between them, assessing. Then he turned to Richard. You got a court order giving you custody of Frank. I'm filing for conservatorship. So that's a no. Hank crossed his arms. Until you have legal authority, Frank stays where he wants to stay. And right now, he wants to stay here. Richard's face flushed with anger. You're making a mistake, Sheriff. Wouldn't be the first time. Hank's tone was flat, unyielding. Now, you and your boys need to leave. Before I cite you for trespassing. Moss stepped forward. Sheriff, with all due respect, I don't recall asking for your input, Brian. Hank's hand rested on his sidearm. Get back in your trucks. Now. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Richard let out a sharp breath and turned away. Fine. But this isn't over. It never is with you, Richard, Hank said. The men climbed back into their trucks. Richard paused before getting into his, turning to look at Marcus one last time. You have no idea what you've done, he said quietly. No idea what's coming. Marcus met his gaze without flinching. Bring it. The trucks drove away, engines growling down the mountain. When they were gone, Hank turned to Marcus. You got a name? Marcus Webb. Former military? Marines. Hank nodded slowly. Figured. You got that look. He glanced at Frank. You doing all right, Frank? Better, now, Frank said. Hank looked at Marcus again. Richard's not going to give up. He's desperate. And desperate men do stupid things. I know. Can you handle it? Marcus thought about Afghanistan. About the firefights, the ambushes, the nights when survival was measured in seconds. About Sargent, who'd pulled him from a burning vehicle and refused to leave his side, even when the world was exploding around them. Yeah, Marcus said. I can handle it. Hank studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. But if things get out of hand, you call me. Don't try to be a hero. Too late for that. Marcus said with a faint smile. Hank almost laughed. I'll check in tomorrow. Stay safe. As the cruiser drove away, Marcus and Frank stood together on the porch, watching the valley below. Sargent sat between them, calm and vigilant. Thank you, Frank said quietly. Marcus shook his head. Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. Frank smiled, a small, defiant smile. Good. They went back inside, where the fire crackled and the cabin felt, for the first time, like a fortress. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. The war for Calhoun Ridge was far from over. But Marcus Webb and Sargent weren't going anywhere. The next 2 weeks settled into a strange, tense rhythm. Marcus and Frank developed a routine, morning exercises, meals cooked on the propane stove, evenings by the fire reading old books from Frank's shelves. Ed Holloway visited twice a week with supplies, and Diane Mercer called regularly with updates on the legal proceedings. The court had appointed a guardian ad litem, a retired social worker named Helen Yates, who visited Calhoun Ridge and spent 3 hours interviewing Frank, assessing his living conditions, and observing his relationship with Marcus. She'd been thorough, professional, and, Marcus thought, fair. Her report concluded that Frank Calhoun was mentally competent, living in safe conditions, and receiving adequate care. Richard's petition for conservatorship was denied. Diane called with the news, and Frank wept with relief. But Richard didn't give up. He filed an appeal. Then another. He hired private investigators to dig into Marcus's background, trying to find anything, criminal history, mental health issues, financial troubles, that could be used to discredit him. They found nothing. Marcus Webb had an honorable discharge, a clean record, and a service history that included 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. Frustrated, Richard shifted tactics. It started with small things. The phone line to the cabin was cut, forcing Frank and Marcus to rely on Ed's satellite phone for emergencies. Then the propane delivery truck accidentally skipped their scheduled refill, leaving them scrambling to find fuel before the cold snap hit. Marcus reported the incidents to Sheriff Morrison, who documented everything but admitted there was little he could do without proof. Then things escalated. One morning, Marcus woke to find graffiti spray painted on the cabin's side wall. Thief. Squatter. Leave. Sargent had barked furiously during the night, but by the time Marcus reached the window, whoever had done it was gone. Frank stared at the vandalism, his face pale with anger and fear. He won't stop. I know. Marcus grabbed a bucket and scrub brush. But neither will we. That afternoon, while Marcus was scrubbing the paint away, Sergeant suddenly bolted toward the tree line, barking in sharp, urgent bursts. Marcus dropped the brush and ran after him. He found the dog standing at the edge of the clearing, staring at something on the ground. As Marcus approached, his stomach turned. It was a dead rabbit, its body broken, laid deliberately across the trail that led from the cabin to the spring. But it wasn't just the animal's death that chilled Marcus. It was the way it had been positioned, splayed out like a warning, and the piece of paper tucked under its body. Marcus pulled the paper free, careful not to disturb evidence. The message was typed, impersonal. Last warning. Leave or face the consequences. Marcus crumpled the note in his fist, rage burning cold in his chest. That evening, he showed it to Frank. The old man's hands trembled as he read it. This is Brian Moss, Frank whispered. Richard's way of scaring people. It's not going to work. Marcus. Frank's voice broke. Maybe you should leave. This isn't worth dying for. Marcus knelt beside the wheelchair. Frank, listen to me. I've been in war zones where people wanted me dead every single day. I've been shot at, blown up, and left for dead. And I'm still here. He paused. Richard and his thugs don't scare me. And I'm not leaving you. Frank's eyes filled with tears. Why do you care so much? Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Because when I left the service, I felt like I didn't matter anymore. Like I was invisible. Just another broken soldier nobody needed. He swallowed. But here, with you I matter. What I do matters. And I'll be damned if I let them take that away from either of us. Frank gripped Marcus's hand. You're a good man. So are you, Marcus said quietly. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat by the window with Sergeant, watching, waiting. Around midnight, he saw lights, headlights, moving slowly up the ridge road with their beams turned off. Here we go, Marcus whispered. Sergeant growled low, ears flat against his head. The vehicle stopped just beyond the clearing, hidden in the trees. Marcus could make out two figures moving through the darkness, approaching the cabin. He slipped outside silently, Sergeant at his heel. They circled around, using the terrain for cover, until they were behind the intruders. Marcus recognized them immediately. Brian Moss and another man, younger, stockier. They carried gasoline cans. White-hot rage flooded through Marcus. They were going to burn the cabin down. With Frank inside, Marcus stepped from the trees. Put them down. Both men spun around. Moss's hand went for his gun, but Marcus was faster. Years of combat training took over. He closed the distance in 3 strides, struck Moss's wrist with a sharp, precise blow that sent the gun flying, then swept the man's legs out from under him. Moss hit the ground hard, breath exploding from his lungs. The second man dropped his gas can and ran. Sergeant chased him, barking furiously, driving him back toward the road. Marcus planted his boot on Moss's chest, pinning him. Give me one reason not to beat you unconscious right now. Moss glared up at him, defiant. Richard will destroy you. Richard's going to jail, Marcus said. And so are you. He pulled out Ed's satellite phone and called Sheriff Morrison. Hank arrived with 2 deputies within the hour. Moss was arrested on the spot, charged with attempted arson, trespassing, and criminal threats. The second man was picked up trying to hitchhike back to town. Richard Calhoun was brought in for questioning the next morning. Diane Mercer sat in on the interrogation and called Marcus afterward. They've got him, she said, triumph in her voice. Moss rolled on Richard to cut a deal. Testified that Richard hired him to intimidate you and Frank. Paid him $5,000 to burn the cabin down. Marcus exhaled slowly. So it's over? Richard's being charged with conspiracy to commit arson and elder abuse. He'll likely take a plea deal to avoid jail time. But his legal guardianship petition is dead. And once the criminal case is resolved, we can file for a permanent restraining order. What about the land? It's Frank's. Free and clear. Richard has no claim. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, tension he didn't realize he'd been carrying for weeks. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Marcus. You saved Frank's life. When Marcus told Frank the news, the old man wept. Deep, shaking sobs that seemed to pour out years of fear and grief. Marcus knelt beside him, one hand on his shoulder. It's over, Frank. You're safe. Frank gripped his hand. We did it. Yeah, Marcus said. We did. 2 months later, spring arrived in earnest. The snow melted, revealing green meadows and wildflowers that carpeted the ridge in bursts of color. The underground spring, no longer a secret, bubbled clear and cold in a grove just north of the cabin. A team of geologists from Montana State University had visited, confirming the mineral content. The water contained lithium, rare earth elements, and trace compounds valuable for medical research. Conservatively, they estimated the spring's value at $30 million. Frank refused every offer to sell. Instead, he worked with Diane to establish a trust, ensuring the land would be preserved as a nature sanctuary after his death. The mineral rights would be leased carefully, with profits funding veteran rehabilitation programs and land conservation efforts. Marcus stayed, not as a caretaker anymore, but as Frank's friend. They rebuilt the cabin together, adding a ramp for Frank's wheelchair and a small room for Marcus. Ed Holloway helped, and Sheriff Morrison stopped by regularly, often bringing fresh trout he'd caught in the valley below. Sargent became a local legend. Children from the nearby town visited Calhoun Ridge just to meet the hero dog, and Sargent tolerated their attention with patient dignity. One warm afternoon in May, Frank and Marcus sat on the rebuilt porch, watching the valley. Frank's speech had improved significantly with therapy, though it still slurred when he was tired. "You know," Frank said, "Margaret would have liked you." Marcus smiled. Ed said the same thing. She always believed the land would find its protector. Frank looked at him. She was right. Marcus didn't know what to say. Frank continued, "I'm changing my will. The land goes to you when I'm gone." Marcus's head snapped up. "Frank, I can't." "Yes, you can." Frank's voice was firm. "You saved it. You saved me. It's yours." "What about Richard?" "Richard gets nothing. He made his choice." Marcus stared out at the ridge, the pines swaying in the breeze, the mountains rising in the distance. He thought about the homeless veteran who'd stumbled into a gas station and found a purpose. About Sargent, who'd led him towards something worth fighting for. About Frank, who'd trusted him when he had every reason not to. "I don't know what to say," Marcus finally whispered. "Say you'll stay," Frank said. "Say you'll protect this place, the way you protected me." Marcus turned to look at the old man, saw the hope in his eyes, the trust, the love. "I'll stay," Marcus said. Frank smiled, deep and genuine. "Good." Sargent barked once, as if sealing the promise. And on Calhoun Ridge, beneath the endless Montana sky, two men who'd been abandoned by the world found family in each other. Not through blood, but through loyalty, courage, and the simple act of showing up when it mattered most. The memorial stood in a grove of aspens, white bark glowing in the afternoon sun. It was simple, a smooth granite stone engraved with Margaret Calhoun's name and dates, and beside it, a new stone. Francis Frank Calhoun, 1946 to 2025, protector of the land. Beloved friend. Marcus stood before it, Sargent at his side. The dog's muzzle had grayed further, and he moved more slowly now, but his eyes were still bright, still watchful. "I kept my promise, Frank," Marcus said quietly. "The land's safe. The trust is running. And Whisper Ridge," he gestured toward the ridge, "is helping veterans who need it." Whisper Ridge had become a retreat center, a place where veterans struggling with PTSD, homelessness, and transition could find peace. 10 cabins had been built, each one simple but warm, each one surrounded by the forests and mountains that seemed to heal just by existing. Marcus ran the center with help from Ed, Diane, and Sheriff Morrison. 43 veterans had passed through in the first year. Some stayed a week. Some stayed months. All of them left changed. "You were right," Marcus continued. "Margaret was right. The land needed a protector. And somehow you found me." He placed a small stone on Frank's grave, a tradition he'd learned in the Marines. A way of saying, "You're not forgotten." Sargent nudged his hand gently. Marcus scratched behind his ears. "Come on, boy. Let's go home." They walked back toward the cabin, where smoke rose from the chimney and lights glowed warm in the windows. 3 veterans sat on the porch, talking quietly. One of them waved at Marcus. He waved back. This was home now, not just for him, but for everyone who'd lost their way. And as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Marcus Webb stood on the ridge and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of war, but the presence of purpose. And in the wind through the pines, he swore he heard Frank's voice, gentle and proud. Well done, son. Well done. In the quiet corners of the world, miracles happen when someone decides to stop walking past the broken and the abandoned. When someone chooses to stand between cruelty and its victims. When someone says, "Not on my watch." Marcus Webb was just a homeless veteran with a dog and $47. But that was enough. Because sometimes, all it takes to change the world is one person willing to stay when everyone else leaves. May this story remind you that you are never too broken, too lost, or too forgotten to make a difference. If this touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. And subscribe to New Light Stories for more tales of redemption, courage, and everyday miracles. May you find your purpose. May you protect what matters. And may you never walk past someone in need. God bless you, and thank you for being here.